again, everyone, and thank you, as always, for joining us. My name is Brian Thomas, and I am with CCS Fundraising. We have partnered with the Diocese of Columbus for the Parish and School Secure program. As always, I want to start with a small amount of housekeeping. As you logged into the webinar this afternoon, by default, the webinar is using your computer's audio, so your speakers and microphone. If you prefer, you can also call in and use your phone speakers and microphones for audio instead. If you click phone call, a number and access code will appear, and you can log in that way. At the end of the webinar, we will have time for questions. At that time, I will unmute everyone, and you can ask a question verbally of the whole group. Or if you prefer, on the right-hand side on your dashboard is a box that says questions. If you type a question in there, I will be able to see it, and I will answer it for the group. If you need to leave the webinar early, we certainly understand. If you have a question, though, please type it in the box at any time, and I will answer the question at the end of the webinar, and those answers will be available in the recording posted on YouTube. Right now, I want to turn it over to Tiff to lead us in prayer and walk us through the agenda.
All right, thank you, Brian, our own YouTube star. Today we'll open with a Hail Mary, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Well, today we have a full agenda, and I'm thankful certainly that we have CCS fundraising, and that consistently the feedback we're getting does relate to major giving programs and major gift assistance. And actually, out of all the schools that took the survey before Secure Schools started, 80% identified major gift assistance as an area where we need help. So the range was everything from raising money for operating, scholarships, tuition assistance, but the tool was the same, being able to work with our major donors and gain that funding. So I will turn it over to Brian, and we'll get started. I think we had spoken before the webinar, and he commented that this is dense material. So remember, we send out the webinars in our weekly newsletter. So please, don't fret if you're wanting something in the presentation, and you can always follow up with either of us to get more information or repeat, etc. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Tiff. And yeah, I want to double down on that point. If you do have any questions, or if there's a topic you wish we'd cover in greater depth, or that I should have added more detail to, please do reach out. So looking at an overview of our discussion today on major gifts programs and moves management, what we're going to be discussing is creating a donor pipeline, how to manage that donor pipeline, how to engage those donors, and then we're also going to look at some very school-specific prospect scenarios and how donors can be engaged in a variety of different scenarios. So at the very beginning, let's talk about donor pipelines. I'm sure most of your schools do preserve some form of donor database, be it in the form of an Excel spreadsheet, or perhaps you use a CRM such as Salesforce or Razor's Edge. That information, however, represents raw data. You have a lot of demographic information, addresses, names, their rudimentary relationship with your school, if they're a past donor, do they have children in your school, etc. However, that database can be daunting. I was speaking with one school leader recently, and they have a rather large donor database, and it can be difficult to segment and sequence, as we discussed last week, when you have a large donor database, but only are looking at the raw data. So our initial question is, how do you take that raw data in the form of your donor database and turn that into a donor pipeline that supplies a major giving program, that supplies you with large donors to your school that can be managed and grown? The first step in this process from converting to a donor database to a donor pipeline is wealth screening. And I want to say at the outset that this is a tool that's available to you through the Office of Development and Planning. A well screening of your donor database is going to provide you with some key information. First of all, it's going to provide you with net worth information for your constituents. It's also going to provide you with estimated giving capacity for those key donors. So right away, we're able to begin segmenting your donor database into giving capacity. A second step will be to conduct what's called an RFM analysis. Well, I'm sure many of you are familiar with wealth screening, and RFM analysis may be more foreign. RFM stands for recency, frequency, and money. What this analysis takes is the information about how much a donor gives, how frequently a donor gives, and how recently a donor has given, the recency, frequency, and money, and creates a score out of 300. This score effectively tells you how close a donor's relationship is to your school, based again on how recent, how frequently, and how much money they've given to your school. This score will allow you to then sequence your donor database. You've segmented by net worth and estimated giving, and now you can put in order by how close a donor is to your institution. What this will create for you is a healthy donor pipeline. Last week, we discussed the strategies of top-down and inside-out fundraising. This donor pipeline, with information about net worth and estimated giving from your well screen, and affinity or closeness to your institution through your RFM analysis, allows you to do just that, segment and sequence. Now you're able to take your donor database and organize a systematic approach to those donors. This is where moves management comes into play. Once you have a pipeline, it is necessary to begin managing the donors in that pipeline, and this is called moves management. This is a step-by-step and methodical way to engage donors in that pipeline. It is relationship building. One of the keys that we discussed last week is the difference between philanthropy, which is about donor-focused relationship building, and fundraising, which is about school-focused cash raising. Moves management is centered on the donor. What is the relationship between your school and that potential donor, and how can that relationship be strengthened? A healthy moves management program is strategic. It looks at that relationship and determines how best to grow the relationship between school and donor. Very importantly, a healthy moves management system is based on documentation and activity tracking. We're going to discuss more about the importance of documentation and tracking, but in essence, we want to monitor that relationship, see what activities are effectively growing that relationship, and where can we change our strategy to be more effective. Finally, a healthy moves management system is flexible. We want to accommodate, at first, the school's needs, but also, and more importantly, that individual supporter's needs. When you think about growing a relationship with a donor, or really growing any relationship, there are not a lot of differences. What are the particular interests of that donor? And how can we show how our school can pique those interests for that potential donor? To give a real-world example, a particular donor may not enjoy annual events, galas, auctions, that kind of thing. It would be then unwise in an effort to build a relationship to invite a donor repeatedly to a school-sponsored event. So learning about your donors and what your donors' preferences are and what their philanthropic interests and priorities are will help you develop that relationship. It's also important to know what a moves management system is not. It is not an applicable system for mass fundraising. When we're talking about moves management and donor pipelines, this is only appropriate for a major giving program. It is not helpful for a mass mailing or a school carnival that raises money or other annual event. An appropriate strategy there is something much more focused on mass giving. A healthy moves management system is also not appropriate for what we can call hit and run fundraising, so one-off needs. Think there about a bake sale or a car wash that raises money for a very specific small project. A moves management system is not appropriate there because relationship building takes time and is very intentional. And lastly, and this relates back to the importance of documentation and tracking, a moves management system cannot exist within an employee's head or on an employee's desk in the form of sticky notes. For one, that doesn't allow for proper documentation and tracking, but for another, it prevents healthy relationships from being formed between donor and institution, and rather promotes relationships between donor and solicitor. In a healthy moves management system, we're always thinking about how a donor's relationship is growing with the school, not with individuals within that school. So to sum up what a moves management system is, it's a strategic way to build relationships with donors. Who are they and who are we as an institution, and how can we grow in our common interest? By way of a brief overview of how a moves management system is structured and attempts to operate. What it does is establishes a steady movement of prospects from that donor pipeline to actual donors. It is a way to systematically approach people who are not currently supporting your institution philanthropically and begin to approach them. And it gives you systematic ways to do so. We'll look at examples of that in a minute. It also allows you to control and evaluate how you cultivate or develop new relationships within the school. If you have a systematic approach in place, you will know where in that approach particular donors fall and what the general next steps may be. Of course, they have to be tailored to that individual donor, but you'll know what the next steps should be. A healthy moves management system will also help you monitor how effective your fundraising program is, what is working and what is not. So if you track activity with each individual donor and you're not seeing the return on time and effort investment, then you'll know that you need to pivot in your relationship building strategy. Moves management also allows you to create benchmarks for success in your fundraising program. So rather than more arbitrarily choosing a goal, by looking at your donor database and your donor pipeline and evaluating the health of your relationships with your major giving donors, you can set realistic goals for your fundraising program. It will also then allow you to evaluate the effectiveness of that plan and alter it. And then finally, a moves management system creates a historical record of your donors, both past and present. This allows you further evaluation of your program, but also it allows you to have institutional knowledge that will exist beyond current staff knowledge. To sum all of that up, moves management is relationship building with the institution and the donor, and doing so in an organized, systematic way that is more streamlined and effective. Let's look at the goals of a moves management system. What we want to do is build relationships with constituents and manage that relationship building. Who is interacting with your school? In what way are they interacting? And how can we build lifelong relationships? I was speaking with another school leader recently, and we were lamenting the difficulty in fundraising in schools, that if you're a high school 9 through 12 or a lower school K through 8, you have a sort of timer on your annual giving relationship with, in particular, parents. Their student graduates from your school and they're no longer a reliable donor. What moves management in a school setting aims to do is build longer lasting relationships, because unlike an annual giving program where parents are giving to an annual fund because their child goes to your school, which is a very transactional fundraising approach, this is aligning the mission of a donor and the institution, encouraging that donor to maintain that relationship long after their children have graduated from your school because they believe in the particular mission and value of your school. Moves management also allows you to be more strategic in your solicitation approach. How are we going to approach our major donors? And what specific strategies need to be in place for each one individually? Remember, each relationship is going to be a little bit different from every other relationship. So your approach strategy is going to need to vary in between donors. It also allows you to manage that pipeline. And when we say manage the pipeline, what we're talking about is advancing donors from early stages of a relationship into actual donors to your school. So this process of identifying, evaluating who this potential donor is, cultivating a relationship, and then moving into a solicitation phase. And then lastly, it allows you to be analytical and strategic about the effectiveness of your fundraising program. Are we setting specific goals, and are we meeting those specific goals? The documentation and tracking in a major giving program that implements a moves management system allows you to set those goals and evaluate how effective you were at achieving them. So again, to sum up these moves management goals, how do we build relationships? How do we strategically approach new donors? How do we advance new constituents from, say, new parent to strong supporter? And how do we evaluate our fundraising programs? To say perhaps even more succinctly what the goals and benefits are of a healthy moves management system, it allows you to manage and coordinate. What relationships do I have? What relationships can I have? And how can I coordinate that relationship building across my development team? 2 points there. I said your development team. You may be thinking, I'm the development director, or I'm the principal of my school, and I'm the principal person who seeks new funds or engages new donors. I'd like to challenge that and suggest that there are many more members of your development team in your school. As we discussed last week, building a culture of philanthropy is about recruiting key volunteers and leaders to serve as storytellers for your institution. You find those closest board members, parents, administrators, faculty, and staff, people who can effectively tell the story of your institution, who can demonstrate the value of your school, and communicate it effectively to new relationships. That is your development team. The benefits of having a healthy moves management system. Data shows that it is more effective at raising money and building new relationships. It allows you to be organized, systematic, and efficient. It allows you to preserve institutional knowledge. It allows you to bring more constituents and stakeholders into the philanthropic process, and it provides you with an opportunity to engage volunteers. A last point on the benefits and goals of a moves management system. Again, in a conversation with a school leader with a particularly large database, we use the analogy of an uncultivated or an unharvested field. When you look at your donor database, it can be daunting to see that number of individuals who need to be connected with, have a relationship developed, and solicited. This process allows you to have an organized approach to harvesting that field of donors. Okay, let's get more into the specifics of what this process looks like. We recommend a very simple rating process for your donors in your donor pipeline. We rate these as D, C, B, A, and S. That's discover, cultivate, brief, ask, and steward. So in our moves management process, you've taken your database, you've done your analysis, you've developed your donor pipeline. The next step is to assign a rating, D, C, B, A, or F, to each of the people in your donor pipeline. These ratings are meant to tell you where in the relationship building process a potential donor is. So let's apply this specifically to schools. I would rate a new parent who has their first child attending your school and has no previous history with your institution. So they're not an alum, they're not a previous donor, they're not a legacy where their parents or they or their grandparents went to your school. So they're new to town and their son or daughter is attending your school for the first time. We can very firmly rate this individual as a D. We don't know what their philanthropic capacity is. We don't know what their philanthropic interests are. We don't know if they're philanthropic at all. We don't know very much about this family at all. So they are firmly in the discover category. The moves management process will allow you to move someone from discovery into cultivation. The discovery process can be as simple as inviting people, and realizing that this is difficult right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, but it can be as simple as inviting new parents to a back to school event. And that can be done in this time virtually, or reaching out via telephone or email to all new parents in your school and beginning to establish the foundation of a relationship with these new families. Once that initial connection is made, you can advance someone through the process to the cultivation phase. Cultivation is all about building a relationship. While discovery is about making that first connection, cultivation is about finding out what the philanthropic interests of a particular donor are and how they align with your own institution. During the cultivation process, we'll also want to do research by adding this new family to your wealth screen and RFM analysis. So we're doing hard data research on their net worth, estimated giving capacity, and affinity to your school. But at the same time, we're doing a soft analysis and building that relationship. What are they interested in? Why do they send their kids to your institution? So for instance, are they passionate about Catholic schools in general, or did they choose your school for a different reason? Once a relationship has been cultivated and you know the philanthropic interests of a potential donor, and you have communicated the mission and value of your school to that donor, they may be ready to move into what's called the briefing phase. It is difficult to overestimate the importance of the briefing phase in the moves management process. Briefing is all about communicating need to a particular donor that your institution currently has. They are already aligned with the mission. We did that in the cultivation phase. But right now, there is a specific need that your institution has. Perhaps you're engaging in a capital campaign to buy new property, to build an extension on the school. Perhaps you are conducting an emergency funding campaign for scholarships because of the current COVID-19 crisis. But you need to clearly communicate what that need is and how that donor's increased support can help meet your community's needs. This conversation is not a solicitation for funds. A briefing meeting is very simply about communicating a school's need and identifying how a supporter can help advance the mission of that institution by meeting that need. We typically recommend that you end a briefing conversation by telling a donor that you would like to schedule another meeting for a solicitation. I would like for you to prayerfully consider with your family allowing me to present you with a proposal for X. After a successful briefing meeting, a potential donor moves into the ask phase, and this is where the solicitation comes. I say here on the slide to ask the prospect with confidence. You can do this with confidence because of the 3 previous steps you've taken in moving this relationship through the moves management process. Remember, we've discovered what their interests are, we've built that relationship and found mission alignment between their interests and the mission of the school. We've clearly and succinctly laid out the needs of the institution right now and told them that we need their support. After those 3 steps, you can very confidently make a solicitation to a donor because we know they care about the school, we know they are aligned with that mission, and we know that they want to support it. After a solicitation, it is also difficult to overemphasize the importance of the stewardship phase. And I want to highlight that stewardship is not necessarily thank you. Yes, recognition and thank you is important, but stewardship is more broadly about maintaining a relationship. In the discovery, the cultivation, the brief, and the ask phase, we have built that relationship systematically to that donation. But it is just as important moving forward to maintain that relationship. And I would suggest that we can think about this process, DCBAS, like any other human relationship. It must begin with a connection. It must be cultivated where interests are shared. We can communicate to each other what our needs are, and then we can increase our engagement. But then that relationship must be maintained. And an institution's relationship with a donor is no different. By applying this rating system, you can segment your donor pipeline by individuals who exist in the DCBAS rating. This tells you the next steps in each phase. My last notes on the rating steps. the DCBAS. We know that someone is a D if we don't know what their net worth is, if we don't know what their estimated giving capacity is, and we don't know what their likeliness to give to the school is. If you can't answer those questions, someone is a D. If you can answer some of those questions, but you don't know how much an appropriate ask is, someone is probably in the cultivation stage. If you do know how to answer all of those questions and can identify a target request for a solicitation, someone is in that briefing phase. No one should advance from the briefing phase until a specific need is communicated. Moving to this next slide, I ask everyone not to be overwhelmed by the number of images that are there. This is a way of breaking out some of the previous process into more specific phases, just to give you a little bit more detail. In this moves management process, we're going to identify particular families in the relationship to your school, so a new parent. We're going to do our research into these new parents. We're going to do our wealth screening, and we're going to do our RFM analysis. We're also going to have conversations with people they may know who are members of your institution. At this point, we can evaluate and or rate with that DCBAS system. And from there, we can determine an appropriate ask. Once a target request can be identified, we need to set a timetable for further engagement. It is important that we have a strategic outline of steps, but also the amount of time to complete them. We want to maintain this systematic approach. So we're going to do X by this date and set a timetable to reaching that solicitation phase. We're going to identify steps to cultivate the relationship and identify the appropriate time to brief and inform this potential donor about the needs of the institution. We're going to schedule a time to appropriately solicit for that targeted request. And of course, we're going to document all of these steps along the way. We're going to recognize and say thank you, or if you're in the middle of a capital campaign or another fundraising effort, you may have other recognition strategies in place, such as a donor wall. And then you're going to steward and maintain that relationship. Pivoting just a little bit, I want to look at the structure of a healthy development strategy and development office within your school. We know from the surveys that we sent out, both from CCS Fundraising and from TIF in the Office of Development and Planning, that most of the schools in the diocese focus their fundraising on annual appeals, annual events, online giving, and other forms of fundraising. Our suggestion, however, would be that only about 10 to 30% of your fundraising should focus on these renewable gifts. These efforts, your annual appeal, your annual event, are largely those transactional fundraising efforts that we discussed last week and are not relationship-based or long-term. They are, however, an important part of your development program and an integral step in building relationships. If you're unsure of where to start with a new donor, asking for an annual appeal donation is a good first move, but then they should be invited to grow that relationship. If appropriate, they can be moved into the major gift space. And then finally, planned giving can be an important part of your development efforts. Our suggestion from there is that in a healthy development office and in a healthy major gifts program, 70 to 90% of your development should be philanthropic, should focus on major gifts and planned giving. Let's look at a sample school budget and break it out to see what that would look like if 70 to 90% of your fundraising efforts focused on major giving and planned giving, and 10 to 30% focused on those more transactional gifts. Let's assume that 75% of your school's operating budget is covered by tuition. We can also take for a moment 2% as other revenue that might come into the school. We discussed last week as an example, perhaps you have the ability to rent out facilities. That may bring in some revenue, which leaves 23% of your operating budget to development. If we adhere to the idea that 30% will come from those transactional fundraising efforts, and 70% will come from philanthropic major giving and planned giving, 7% would be your annual appeal, your annual gala, and other annual fundraising events, and 16% would be that major giving work. What this means for a school with a budget of $2 million is that $322,000 would come into the budget from major giving and from planned giving. As a further example, if we take 25 of your top donors, they would have to give an average gift of just under $13,000 to attain that goal. Now, obviously, that's an average, and we would spread that out according to net worth, estimating giving capacity, and that RFM score. Yes, this is a large chunk of your budget. However, it is a sustainable form of fundraising for your institution and overcomes the problem of cyclical fundraising in a school where people will graduate and you will lose those potential donors. I would encourage you, if you have not already, to engage in a one-on-one conversation with the Office of Development and Planning and CCS Fundraising to talk about how these percentages can break down in your school's budget and how we can take a look at your donor database and come up with a plan for applying a major giving program to your school. At this time, I would like to open us up to questions. I know that that was quite a bit of information, so you may have a number of questions, which is fine. You may want to ask questions offline, and we'll give you the opportunity to do that as well. At this time, I'm going to unmute everyone. Once I do so, once I click unmute all participants, you will still need to click the red microphone to unmute yourself. We have one question that was written in. What are a few great ways you have heard of schools initiating new engagement during these uncertain times, so the COVID-19 pandemic? But to keep it focused on Columbus and schools in the diocese, I have had a number of conversations with school leaders who have expressed concern about their annual fund or loss of revenue from an annual event such as a gala or an auction. And we have discussed ways of beginning a major giving program with the communication that we need to cover that lost revenue for the continued success of the school's mission. So let's say your annual gala nets $40,000 and that gala had to be canceled because of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a good opportunity to begin reaching out in a major giving strategy to talk to those major donors or to cultivate new major donors, explain the need that the COVID-19 pandemic has created. So there is the immediate short-term benefit of recapturing that lost revenue, while simultaneously you're jump-starting your major giving program. That's a very good question. Are there any other questions?
I think on our end, Brian, this is Tiffany again. It's important, and this has come up so many times. So over the last week in our one-on-one conversations, building individual plans. So I just would encourage anybody to reach out if they're thinking that somehow this could correlate to building up their programs or filling gaps.
Absolutely, Tiff. Showing our contact information here. I want to strongly encourage everyone, if you have not engaged in a one-on-one opportunity with us, to do so. I realize that a lot of the information that we gave today, first of all, is a lot of information. And it's also very high level and general rather than specific. So we would very much appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you how these tools and strategies can be applied to your particular school and how we can craft the beginnings of a major giving program and organize your donor database. I would encourage you to reach out to Tiff directly. There is her email and phone number. My email and phone number is also there. So you can reach out to either or both of us, and we are happy to work with your school one-on-one. If you have questions following this webinar, also feel free to reach out to either one of us via phone or email. And otherwise, I look forward to speaking with you on next week's webinar. A follow-up email will be sent out at the conclusion of this webinar that will include a link to this webinar and the YouTube recording, as well as a registration link for next week's webinar and our contact information. Thank you, everybody, for joining this afternoon. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, Brian.